Welcome. We're excited to be here with another episode of That's Debatable, which is the Winsome debate series where we're talking about various issues in AI, specifically things that our team is uniquely suited to comment on and that we've committed a lot of research time to. So today's debate is super exciting and one that I think is a real hot topic that we've already had a lot of interesting conversations on social media about. We're going to be talking about whether the continuous use of AI is undermining our critical thinking skills. So, is regularly using AI hurting our ability to think critically? We're joined today by Chris Youell and Ross Henderson, and I'm going to introduce them and just kind of talk a little bit about their positions really quick. So, Chris kind of advises on AI technology and stays in the loop on all things AI related. For Winsome Marketing, you might notice that we have the same last name, but I assure you that that will not bias me in this moderator role. He is going to be taking the con position today. So he's going to be arguing that AI, in fact, does not undermine our critical thinking skills. So I'm excited to have you. And I will not call you honey by accident. And then Ross Henderson is the everything at Winsome Marketing. He's a senior executive consultant. He runs operations. He's an incredibly valuable member of our team and has been from almost the beginning of the company. So I'm super excited to have Ross here. He does a lot of hands-on client interactions, builds a lot of strategies, and uses artificial intelligence operationally in a lot of ways. So I think he has a lot of interesting things to bring to this conversation as well. I guess it's not a conversation, it's a debate. And he's going to be taking the pro position today, which is arguing that the continuous use of AI does, in fact, undermine our critical thinking skills. So I'm excited to have you both here. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so the rules of debate are that we are going to have opening statements. Everything will be timed according to our formal debate rules. I will be cutting you off at time, so I'll give you a 2-minute warning before your time is up, and then I'll cut you off when your time is completely over, and then we'll move on to the next stage. We are opening with our opening statements, and the first person up is our proposition. So Ross will begin by explaining how, in his perspective, the continuous use of AI is undermining our critical thinking skills. So Ross, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Joy, and welcome everyone. Yeah, so in the time it's going to take me, the 8 minutes or so, to give this opening statement, millions of people all across the world are going to ask AI to think for them instead of thinking for themselves. 2, 3, 5 years ago, they would have thought for themselves, and now AI is picking up all of that kind of cognitive burden. There's a research study that came out last week from OpenAI that showed that 700 million people are using ChatGPT every week. And they're using it for all kinds of different things. It's not just work. There's a lot of kind of personal interactions in there as well. So it's a big issue that we're dealing with today. And I think it's one that's very important for our society today and into the future as well. Now, I accept that AI is making us more productive. It frees us from a lot of kind of time-consuming, labor-intensive tasks and helps us maybe find extra time to work on creative, fulfilling tasks. But the productivity unlocks that we get through AI is not what we're talking about today. The question isn't whether AI is useful or productive or even a net benefit for society. The question is whether this kind of convenience is going to come at a cost to one of the most fundamental characteristics that we have as humans, which is the ability to think critically, to interrogate ideas, to think and act for ourselves. So I wanted to kind of kick off with a definition of critical thinking. And I'm using a definition from Professor Ennis from the University of Illinois. This is pretty widely accepted definition that critical thinking is reasonable, reflective thinking focused on deciding what to believe or to do. There's a lot of kind of constructs within that: logical reasoning and analysis, problem solving in practice, and also emotional reasoning and intelligence, the ability to understand the emotions both of ourselves and others to inform our decision making. So wanted to lay out 3 kind of key pillars that I'll kind of build and advance my argument on. The first pillar is around the concept of offloading and memory loss. And there's a lot of research to back up the danger that AI and technology more broadly brings to us in this kind of scenario. So under the typical use case of AI, the way that most people use it is really to kind of offload a lot of the thinking and also the memory that we previously have done ourselves, right? So we're no longer storing, organizing, and integrating knowledge. We're just retrieving it from an AI system. That's a concept known as cognitive offloading, and it's really kind of central to the idea of memory, right? If you cannot conceive of something, if you cannot remember it and interrogate it in your head, how can you think critically about it if you've outsourced all of that work to AI? Over time, as people do this more and more, it creates a habitual dependency. So you're reaching for the AI tool before you're thinking. And I think that's a path that none of us really want to go down. There's a couple of research studies that back this up. One is from 2011. It was published in the Science Journal, so one of the biggest journals in the world. And it was a study on Google's effect on memory. So there was a series of experiments, and when people or participants knew that they could look information up on Google later versus being asked to retain it, they remembered fewer facts and instead kind of defaulted to that knowledge of where to find them. So that's just kind of proof that instead of storing that knowledge, we're just encoding where to access that knowledge instead. We're essentially offloading and outsourcing that cognitive ability and that critical thinking ability to technology. So that was focused on Google. It was from 2011, before AI was really the kind of dominant specter that it is in our society now. The research is still relatively nascent here, just because this is a new technology. But there's another new study that came out a few weeks ago in the Society's Journal that focused more on this idea of cognitive offloading. There were surveys and interviews done with, I think, 600 or so participants. And what they found was that frequent AI use predicted lower critical thinking scores because of that offloading tendency. So at a population level, people who are using AI more and more are showing weaker critical thinking abilities. And a lot of the times that is due to that offloading. The kind of second pillar of my argument, is about the atrophy of the kind of critical thinking skills and the ability to do so, and the fact that offloading really limits that. So when AI is taking over a lot of these tasks, we as humans are practicing them less, right? We are thinking less, we are evaluating ideas less, we are looking for logical fallacies less, we're reasoning less, etc. Over time, that means that the muscles that we use, our brain, and are really weakening, right? Similar to any muscle. If you don't use it, it atrophies, and that creates real risk when there is such a time as we do need to recall these skills. We do need to rely on them. It could be a situation where you cannot access AI. It could be a student in the exam room. It could be a doctor in the field. It could be a pilot who no longer has access to autopilot and has to fly in an emergency situation. If we haven't practiced all of the skills that go into that, it makes us far weaker when it comes to time to kind of lift that heavy weight and put in the work there. Okay, let me move on to my third pillar, which is on the concept of homogenization and declining creativity. So if you think about the way that LLMs and generative AI work, what they do is they encourage a convergence on the average of all the information out there, right? It's not new creative thought, it's not innovative, it's not breaking the mold, it's just the mean of all the existing knowledge that's out there. And I think we can all agree that no one wants to be the mean, right? Everyone wants to be above average. We want to be striving for better. AI is pushing people towards formulaic, predictable outputs and really getting rid of that struggle that sparks originality, the barriers that we have to overcome, that we have to think creatively to get around. The research supporting this, my primary kind of source here, is an MIT study from 2023, which studied students who were asked to write articles through two groups, one who could write the article with use of ChatGPT, and one who would just write the article without relying on any AI technologies. A couple of key results of that. were that the students who relied on ChatGPT exhibited lower brainwave activity than those who were asked to write without using technology. Additionally, the kind of teachers and professors who were asked to grade those essays found that they were soulless, lacking creativity, and very generic and bland. Additionally, when those students were tested to recall the knowledge that they wrote about in the essay later without access to AI, they really struggled and had weak memory, weak ability to interrogate the ideas and to rehash them and present them to the group.
All right.
So AI isn't really just changing how we access the information, right? It's changing how we think. There's a lot of research here, a lot of which I cited above and more of which I'll discuss throughout this debate. But it weakens our memory, our skills, our critical thinking skills atrophy, and creativity and the ability to be creative really dissipates. So it's not just a tool that we're using to be more productive. It's something that we're really becoming far too dependent on, and is reshaping the way that we think and the way that we act, and that's not a healthy path for us to go down.
That's time. All right. Good job. All right, and now we're going to hear the other side arguing for the value of using AI, arguing against the fact that it does undermine our critical thinking skills. So Chris, go ahead.
All right.
It starts now.
All right. So the question, does artificial intelligence usage undermine human critical thinking skills? And I'm going to argue, no, it doesn't. AI, when used wisely, does not weaken critical thinking. It actually enhances it, and it expands it and provides new opportunities for deeper analysis. To claim otherwise would be to confuse the tool with the user. We've always developed technologies that have shifted the way we access and process information. From the printing press to the calculator to the internet, in every case, critics feared that these tools would make us mentally lazy. Yet history consistently shows the opposite. These tools free us up from mundane tasks and allow us to focus more energy on reasoning and problem solving, creativity. AI is just the next tool in that line of tools. So critical thinking is not about storing facts in our head. It's about questioning, analyzing, and weighing information. AI doesn't replace these skills. It requires them. When anybody consults AI for an answer, they must still ask, is this information credible? Does it apply to my situation? How does it compare with alternative perspectives? The same way that you would have to ask these questions when you're talking to a professor or a peer or a parent. Using AI responsibly demands discernment. In other words, the presence of AI actually requires critical thinking because blind acceptance of its output is inadequate. The same way blind acceptance of output of from anybody else is inadequate for critical thinking. For example, just as a calculator doesn't eliminate the need to understand algebraic concepts, using AI doesn't erase the need for logical reasoning. In fact, the calculator helped mathematics advance because students could move beyond mechanical calculations and focus on deeper conceptual challenges. AI is doing the same for critical reasoning today. So intensive AI use can make us more reflective thinkers, right? When people see AI's response, they often compare it to their own intuitions and knowledge. And they'll ask, like, why did it frame it this way? Or what's the reasoning behind this? Or is there some kind of bias in this output? And these questions are classical critical thinking skills. In many classrooms, teachers are using AI output specifically as case studies for critique. Rather than undermining thinking, AI is giving us concrete examples to analyze and debate and improve on. Consider how law students are using AI to generate draft arguments. The point isn't to accept it wholesale and just be done with it. It's to evaluate it. Is the logic sound? Are precedents being used correctly? This process strengthens their analytical ability rather than dulling it. Critical thinking thrives in environments where diverse perspectives and abundant knowledge is available. In the past, access to such resources were always limited by like geography or wealth or whether or not you could make it into a good college. So AI levels this playing field, right? Now, a teenager in a rural town can engage with philosophical debates or scientific literature or coding tutorials as easily as somebody in a major university. This democratization of information creates more opportunities for people to practice critical analysis. More input means more to weigh, more to compare, and more to synthesize. If anything, intensive use of AI ensures critical thinking is no longer reserved for those that are privileged enough to live near a library or be next to a college. It opens up this skill to be used by a broader population. Also, another point, history shows that tools enhance, not diminish cognitive skills. All the way back, you go way back to like Socrates, and Socrates was once himself worried that writing itself would destroy memory and weaken the mind. The father of Western philosophy was concerned about that. Centuries later, critics of the calculator warned that students would no longer understand math. And more recently, skeptics said that the internet would make us shallow. It would make us shallow. Yet, in each case, human intellectual life did not collapse. It evolved and it changed. Writing gave rise to literature, philosophy, and science. Calculators accelerated mathematics and engineering. The internet connected billions of minds in real time for intellectual exchange to varying degrees. But it happened. AI is the next chapter in that story. To say it undermines critical thinking is to ignore consistent patterns of human progress. Tools shift the form of thinking, but they never eliminate its essence. Now, some people say, but if we rely on it too heavily, and we'll stop thinking for ourselves, right? The concern is valid, right? That's a valid concern, but it's not unique to AI. Over-reliance on any tool, from spell check to GPS, can create dependency. The problem is not the technology itself, but the way it is taught, integrated, and regulated. If a student opens AI and just copies the answer word for word without analysis, the failure lies in poor training for the student, not for the existence of AI. Just as we teach students how to cite sources and how to check calculators' results, or how to evaluate a website, we must teach them how to critically engage with AI. With proper guidance, intensive AI use strengthens critical thinking rather than replacing it. And then finally, AI represents not a substitute for human thought, but a partner for it. It can generate multiple perspectives, point out hidden patterns, and present counter arguments, but it's up to the human, it's up to the user to decide which of these reasonings hold weight and which evidence is relevant and which conclusion is justified. This collaboration mirrors the Socratic method itself, dialogue leading to insight. AI provides the dialogue partner. But the human must exercise judgment, just as you would with speaking with any human. Critical thinking is not diminished, it is amplified through this process.
You have 1 minute left.
All right, so let me be clear. Intensive AI use does not undermine critical thinking skills. It shifts them, it challenges them, and in fact, it deepens them. It requires discernment, promotes reflection, expands access, follows the trajectory of historical tools, and fosters human-machine collaboration. The danger isn't AI itself, but our willingness to teach it and use it responsibly. Just as writing and calculators and the internet once faced skepticism, AI too will ultimately prove to be a catalyst for a higher order thinking. The end.
All right. Thanks. 30 minutes to spare. Okay. All right. Ross, you're going to now have the opportunity to rebut everything that Chris just said. Your rebuttal is for 6 minutes, and you can start now.
Okay. Yeah, I liked a lot of what Chris said, but I'm not sure he directly addressed the issue at hand, which is, does AI diminish your critical thinking capabilities? I think there was a lot of great policy ideas in there about how we could and should teach AI, but I don't think those are happening right now. Like I said, 700 million people used ChatGPT last week. Who taught them how to do that? No one, right? They're being taught by ChatGPT, who are incentivized to hook them into that system and encourage that dependency. So I don't think we're really arguing about how people are being taught to use AI or whether they're being taught to use AI. I think we're discussing whether it's something that is good for critical thinking, not if people need to be taught how to use AI to critically think. And there's a big central question of, do we trust humans and society as a whole to automatically exercise that judgment when they interact with a new technology? And I would argue no. I'd point to social media and kind of the impact that has had on society and young people over the last 10 or 15 years as some of the negative effects that could come on that. But let me address some of Chris's points directly. I think, one of the key points Chris made was that AI is cognitive amplification. It's not a replacement for our thinking, right? It's something that can extend our capabilities, can handle a lot of the manual work, and can really help us level up and focus on higher level creative tasks. And I'd say that's a good ideal to have, but in reality, for the kind of reasons I just outlined, I don't think that's something that we are going to see out there in the world. People tend to overtrust AI. They tend to default to it. People are lazy. They look for an easy solution, and AI often provides them that. And I think, more often than not, AI is really supplanting rather than supporting the human thought that we have. I refer back to that MIT study that I referenced in my opening statement, where people who outsourced their essay writing to ChatGPT had less cognitive activity through brainwave scans, and additionally were kind of less engaged in the work itself versus the control group who wrote articles the kind of traditional way. Another argument that Chris made was that AI really democratizes access to this information and broadens education. And I'd agree with that, right? Students in remote areas can now access this information. It's not predicated by where you live or your ability to access a library or a good school system or anything like that. But I would respond and say that access to information alone does not equal critical thinking, right? In fact, easy access to information can give you a false impression of knowledge, right? Just because you have information at your fingertips does not mean you understand it. Education is all about learning the process. It's about learning how to question, analyze, and synthesize information. And it's really about doing the reps that help you kind of build that muscle that is your brain. There's another kind of study I found from Gerlich, which found that students who use AI tools heavily tend to engage in less critical inquiry and exhibit lower problem-solving performance in the long run. And that's before we even get into the concept of AI presenting false or hallucinated information, or the fact that it's just a rehashing of all the information that's out there today, and is the average of all of that information, not the best of it, and certainly includes a lot of false and downright misleading information in some cases.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay. There was also the analogy of like the calculator and arithmetic, and I would kind of use that to extend my kind of previous argument, is that sure, calculators free people from having to do tedious arithmetic for higher math concepts, but any math exam I ever took, sure, you could use a calculator, but you still had to show you're working alongside that. AI isn't kind of giving us that, right? It's a black box. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and there's no ability to look under the hood and take a look at what the logical reasoning is and what is kind of driving the answers that it gives you. So whenever you learn arithmetic or any skill, you still learn offline first. Without that, you're not going to do the reps that enable you to develop the knowledge to infer and interrogate some of the results that a system like a calculator or an AI tool might give you. So yeah, I think in summary, in the real world, I think Chris outlined a lot of noble ideals, but in the real world, and Joy knows I'm a little bit of a pessimist, I think people will default to the easy solution. The research tends to support that. And I think that, that's something that is really dangerous for our critical thinking abilities moving forward.
All right, great job. All right, so Chris, now you can take an opportunity to rebut either anything that Ross covered in his opening statements or loosely respond to anything that he presented also in his rebuttal. You'll have an additional opportunity to address that in your cross-examination round. You have 6 minutes starting now.
And now I have to try and figure out what it was I just wrote down, because my handwriting is not very good. All right, so okay, I'll talk about one point Ross brought up in his opening, talking about cognitive offloading, atrophy, and how when we don't use those skills, we can potentially, lose them over time and stuff. Offloading information like that, like I think of, okay, so one of the instances of offloading information is we don't have to memorize 50 phone numbers anymore, because now our phone is able to kind of store that for us. And I don't feel bad not having to memorize all that kind of stuff, because that would just be kind of more clutter in my mind and that sort of thing. And so when it comes to actual the process of critical thinking and analyzing and picking things apart and stuff, that process isn't just about storing trivia. It's not just about storing information. It's about understanding how to take that information and look at it in different ways, in different lights. And so to say that we could only do that based off of the information that we've got stored inside is, I feel, kind of limiting what potential there is for this. Because, like, yes, there is obviously dangers to allowing this to kind of think for us and do all the work for us and stuff. But I feel that goes back again to a training issue. When you say 700 million people used ChatGPT, was it today, yesterday, this week, whenever it was, and who's training them how to do this? Well, nobody is. And so that was what you had said. And so then I feel that goes back to then a core fundamental education issue of just educating people how to think critically, even outside of this, in school, in news. Because if we say, how do we put it down, that people are just kind of lazy, and so they'll just take whatever it says at face value. That can be said for anything. If you're watching the news, if you're reading a book, if you're looking at, anything, any conversation with respected professors or your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving or whatever, like, if you just say, okay, yeah, that makes sense, sure, that's fine, that can happen across anything. And so it's not just AI specific. It's not just this tool that makes it an issue. That's the way that we have all been thinking for a long, long time, and it's a struggle. And so to say that AI would be could cause that problem, I feel, is to say it's just doing the same thing that we have been doing for a long, long time already. The lack of critical thinking isn't a result of just offloading it to AI. It's a result of that just not being taught as we were young or getting older. You reference the study, the MIT study, and watching the cognitive decline in that. And, I feel the tricky, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. The study itself was very limited in its scope, right? So it picked out very specific people in a very specific situation, people that were in universities around in a specific demographic area, all doing the same thing. And so you've got specific people that have gone to college, they've done the work, they've gotten there, and then now we're basing all of the results off of that specific demographic, and that doesn't apply necessarily to a whole population. That probably didn't make sense, but it did in my head. I think looking at it and saying AI isn't a tool the way that the calculators are or anything else is just kind of, I don't know, while I myself, I'll say this, okay, while I myself am also fairly pessimistic in a lot of ways, to just give in to the pessimism and then say, well, that's just the way that it is, and so we have to kind of roll with it, doesn't mean it takes the blame off of the user itself. It doesn't take the blame off of the society to be able to train and to teach people the same way that we would with kids in education and in any field.
We have 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. I think a lot of these arguments just come back to that idea that the challenges that we see are user challenges and not the actual AI itself, because the AI is going to do what the AI was made to do, and how we use it, I feel, determines whether or not we let it be a detriment to our critical thinking or not. I'll stop there.
Okay, good job. All right, now we're going to head into cross-examination. So this is when you guys have the opportunity to actually address one another and respond. This is the only time you will be able to do that, so take advantage of the ability to talk back and forth. The first cross-examination is going to be 8 minutes. Ross, you're going to be able to initiate those questions directly to Chris, and you have 8 minutes to do so. Chris, you can respond as you want, and Ross, your time starts now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with, I think we have a lot of consensus here about, a lot of the blame potentially lies with the user rather than the technology itself. But the technology is built to cater to the user. And I think the challenge I have with AI is its scope is so much more broad than any technology previously, right? I think a lot of people are coming out and saying this is the defining technology of the decade, if not like the first part of the 21st century, even more so than the internet in some instances. So the scope is so broad that I think, no matter how much we go back and forth about the education piece, the genie's out of the bottle here, right? I think I've said the stat like 3 or 4 times now that 700 million people used ChatGPT last week. That's a lot of people. Like, I don't think there's any going back from that. I wanted to kind of address your objection to the MIT study. I think that it's a fair critique in part, and I accept that the research in this field is fairly nascent because this is a relatively new technology, certainly at kind of this level of adoption. But there are several studies that MIT study included, as well as others like the Sparrow study from 2011, which focused on offloading via Google search, that really do show in different populations and in different use cases that offloading through technology affects critical thinking skills. Are there any kind of points or research studies you could point to that could show that AI has improved critical thinking skills in populations, or are we just too early for that?
I from what I tried looking up and finding, I think we're still kind of early in that. Because ChatGPT came out November 2023, and so we're not even 2 years into the process. And so I feel being able to make any kind of sweeping statements one way or the other right now, based off of whatever research is still way too early. And so, yeah, I don't have anything off the tip of my tongue here to be able to cite statistically for it being one way or the other. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this would be a different debate in 5 or 10 years' time, where we had more kind of research to draw on. Okay, let's talk about skill development, because I think you've kind of positioned AI as this like amplifier that will help develop skills, and I've kind of argued that it's something that people are becoming reliant on, and they're not necessarily putting in the reps that are required to become skillful in whatever field they choose to pursue. So I wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were on that, right? Like, if someone is reliant on AI from an early stage in their career or in their learning journey of a particular field, how will they develop the experience and the hard yards and all of the reps really have that critical judgment and that critical thinking ability when they need it.
I mean, I think that argument or that question can still be posed in any field. If we become too reliant on, as a child, if we become too reliant on our parents to solve problems for us, to teach us things and answer our questions and fix our problems, then we don't learn those skills ourselves, right? And if we become too reliant on a particular professor or a podcaster or a politician or an author, or when we just lean on people or things and become dependent on them, there is that risk of not being able to do it ourselves, right? There's that risk of becoming unable to do the thing that we're wanting to do, and we run into some big issues there. So I don't think that's something that is necessarily confined to AI. And so I think it goes back to, again, the education portion of it, the introduction and the training on it. That's why, schools are teaching on AI. That's why workplaces are offering AI training and, online courses and whatever else. Like, education is a very big, important role in being able to use and understand this tool, so that you don't become dependent on it, but you aren't able to use it. You don't use it in the wrong way, right? You don't go to a trade school to, okay, I learned how to use a wrench, now I can become a mechanic. No, you have to actually use go through the training to be able to do the process properly. And so I think, just like that, anybody going forward needs to be able to understand how this is, and then understand where it came from, the same way we do with the other information that we take in now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think AI just really shortcuts a lot of that process, right? So if we were to look at hiring someone at this company, for instance, the people we would want to hire are people who've put in the hard yards, who have written 1,000 articles by hand, or using a computer at least, I'll allow that. Not necessarily people who have just, generated AI slop that's the same as everything else and published it to a website, right? If we were to hire a writer or a content generator, that's the skill set we'd look for. My concern is that, like I said, the genie is out the bottle with AI. There's a lot of kind of unchecked usage going on. There's no, we encounter companies every day who have no consistent framework for how their employees should use AI. I imagine some school systems and educational processes are better than others, but I guess my question would be, like, the train's left the station. How do we kind of get back to it and ensure that we develop these critical thinking skills as people use AI?
Well, I think as the markets become flooded then with people that are using the tool incorrectly, those people start to fall off to the side. And the people who have put the time in and have learned how to do this will rise to the top. The people that have written 1,000 articles by hand will obviously, be above the people who haven't.
You have 1 minute.
Oh man. But the people that rise to the top are the ones that are able to use that tool in a way that can, elevate them, and not just as a crutch itself. And so I feel, those people will start to come up more and more, and everybody else will just drift off into the noise.
I think I would agree with that, but equally, I'm worried about everyone else and what happens to them in that situation. I'll end there.
Okay.
Good. All right. I am worried about them too. Okay. It's really hard for me to not talk. Okay, sorry. So next cross-examination is Chris asking questions to Ross. So you can address anything that's been said so far. You have 8 minutes to ask questions. Ross can respond, and your time starts now.
Oh, well, again, kind of a lot going through here. And I also kind of agree with you, like the potential for a lot of this going downhill is there, and the train has left the station. Yes. But then does that mean you just kind of let it, do we let it ride, or do we kind of try and correct the course here? I don't know. So we're talking about critical thinking, right? If I won't ask specifically where, but you went to university, right?
Yep.
And would you say it was a good one?
Yeah.
Good one, good professors and teachers and stuff. What was it that you would look to in a professor that you would say, this was a good professor, this was a good teacher?
That's an interesting question. I would say a good professor would be someone who would give you a very comprehensive overview of the information, but would also present both sides of it, allow you to kind of interrogate the different ideas and thoughts behind them, and then also really focus on the practical application of those ideas.
Okay. And so you would then assume that they would present both sides at the same time, right? Is that what you're saying? Or that when prompted with a question of, hey, is that, what would somebody else say about this, that they would have the information to be able to kind of answer those questions? Or would it be they would volunteer this stuff right away?
Sure. I mean, much as an AI system would, they would present both sides of the idea, and I think they would also present their perspective on that. And professors are the ones, for the most part, academics are the ones who originate innovation and original thought and new technologies. And that may have happened less in business school where I went to, but if I'd studied science or medicine or some other kind of field like that, I could see a good professor being someone who would push forward that innovation and challenge you to think differently as well.
Okay, so because I'm, what I'm thinking, and as I approach this AI, I look at it almost as like a professor like that, where I can come to it for a specific topic or a broad topic and ask it, hey, I'm interested in this. Tell me something about this. Or I was talking with a friend of mine and we did this crazy comparison where I said, hey, Chat GPT, I want you to make a recommendation for me of 2 films to watch paired up. One by Japanese director Akira Kurosawa and one by Adam Sandler. Looking at their catalog, what would be a good mix of those 2, and tell me why. And so it went through and it made a couple pairings for me that I never would have thought of otherwise. And then it showed me the similarities and the instances of teamwork or overcoming adversity or whatever else. And so it opened my eyes to something that I might not have otherwise seen. And I feel like a good professor does the same kind of thing. It's up to us, though, as the student, to be able to probe further and to ask questions and not take it at just face value. That's not just with AI, that's just with anybody. And so I don't know how is it different, I feel. I want to ask that in your mind there. How would it be different of me asking a professor, a learned teacher or something, about a question like that versus asking ChatGPT?
I think I would circle back to the point about professors being the ones who originate and create new knowledge, so they would have perhaps new perspectives and not just rehash everyone else's perspective. I accept that AI is a great recommendation engine, it's a great productivity tool, it gives us access to information, but access to information is not equivalent to critical thinking, right? It's only one part of the process. You still need the ability to reason and to interrogate the ideas that it presents you. You can perhaps do some of that with AI, but I don't think to the same extent that you could do with a professor who would give you their perspective and frankly would also impart an opinion on it as well, right? AI is intended, I guess, to be an impartial observer and just to present the information and not necessarily to coach you down one path. I think a good teacher can coach you down one path and can coach you down the right path. And of course, it's up to the student to have a level of judgment and make sure that, you know, they seek out good teachers, they seek out good mentors. But I think that's another role of a teacher or a professor that AI cannot play.
Yeah, but a good professor, a good teacher like that will come at this and present you with information or knowledge, but it's based off of either one perspective, it's theirs, or it's, you know, based off of the shoulders of the professors and the people before them, you know, depending on the field and that sort of thing. And so if you've got a single professor that knows history really well and they've read every book on the Civil War and whatever else, that's awesome. But if you then go to a GPT and ask it questions, it not only has read every book on the Civil War, it's read every paper on this one and that one. And I feel the access to information is so much greater, and that it can pick out patterns and it can cross-reference and it can answer questions right away that we would have to then kind of, I don't know. I just feel.
I think the big difference that I see is that a good teacher is not going to write your essay for you. They're going to give you enough kind of leeway and rope to go out there and interrogate the idea and to arrive at your own conclusion. Sure, AI will give you information and probably more information, but it will also help organize all that information for you and package it into whatever kind of finalized product you're looking for.
Yeah, but again, I feel that then goes back to the user argument. Professor's not going to write my paper for me, but if I really wanted to, I could pay somebody else to write it for me. I could go copy it off Wikipedia and pop it in there. But I know that I shouldn't do that because that's not why I'm approaching this. And so, what's that?
30 seconds.
Yeah, I think I just keep going back to it's a user issue. It's a user issue because the same arguments that can be made for ChatGPT or whatever, making us lazy and offloading things and stuff, like we can do that without AI in any field, in any category. And so it's not specific to this, and it's not specifically what hurts our critical thinking. There.
Good job. I'm sorry to jump scare you. All right, great job. Good discussion. So we're entering into the end of the debate here. We've got our final two sections. We're going to do a second rebuttal or expansion. So if you feel the need to continue to rebut your opponent, feel free to do so, or you can expand on your initial ideas, and then you will have your closing argument after that. Keep in mind the rebuttal is 5 minutes and your closing argument is 3. So if there's anything else you want to address, adding it here would probably be a good call. So first up is the proposition. So Ross, you will have 5 minutes for your second rebuttal or expansion, and that 5 minutes starts now.
Okay, so yeah, I think we keep circling back to the same point that it's a user issue. So I won't rebut that any further. I think we've kind of discussed that, but I want to kind of expand the framework a little bit, because up till now, we focused on critical thinking through this lens of like memory and judgment and creativity, and all of those are really important, but that's not a comprehensive definition of creative thinking. I think the part that we haven't talked about so much is our ability to understand people, to relate to them, the emotional intelligence, which is, almost as big a part to us, or probably as big a part to us as humans as our, what we would think of as regular intelligence or critical thinking. So critical thinking, it's not something it's purely logical, right? It's also about weighing the consequences of your actions out in the world. It's about interpreting context. It's about managing your emotions and the emotions of others. If you're a leader, if you're a negotiator, if you're working in a team, if you're a teacher, you can't make good decisions for your people without having that emotional intelligence. And I think this kind of touches on what Joy and Lauren debated last time, which is on the kind of role of AI in emotional intelligence, and can it kind of replace or augment the relationships that we have with people. And I think I definitely argue that no, that's not the case. And in fact, like over-reliance on AI here diminishes critical thinking and diminishes our emotional intelligence as a component of critical thinking, as a component of cognition. So there is, some kind of evidence to support that as well. There's a UCLA study from 2014 where a bunch of sixth graders went to an outdoor camp. Some of them got devices, some of them did not. The ones without devices for that kind of week at summer camp type experience had a much more significant improvement in recognizing facial expressions, emotional cues, and broadly just developing that emotional intelligence that is required. So I think the lesson there is clear, right? That real human interaction, not confining ourselves to screens and becoming overly dependent on AI technologies. That is what drives forward human kind of connection and intelligence and thinking and relationships as a function of all of that. The other kind of thing I want to do here is just step back a little bit. I know we've kind of mentioned a few times that this is a huge societal issue. It's affecting a lot of people. There's already hundreds of millions of people who are, the train has left the station with them, as we would say. But we focus kind of on, okay, what does that mean at the individual level? But what does that mean at the broader societal level, right? If people are losing or diminishing their critical thinking skills, all of the institutions that we have that depend on critical thinking and depend on judgment and depend on the ability to form relationships and work in teams, they all become a lot more vulnerable and a lot more subject to risk. And there's a few different types of risk that I call out there. One, which I've kind of touched on previously in this debate, is innovation risk, right? I think innovation comes from the struggle. It comes from divergent thinking, from the ability to challenge assumptions, connect ideas in new ways. I think with our current reliance on AI, we are kind of lurching towards a world where everyone might be a very efficient user of a tool and can do kind of their small discrete tasks very efficiently and much faster than in the past. But they're not going to be innovators. They're not going to be original thinkers. They're just going to do, kind of function in this neat little box and act as the AI has coached them to act.
1 minute.
Okay. The second is just the risk to kind of society more broadly into a democracy, right? So I think a healthy democracy depends on having citizens who are critical thinkers, who can evaluate evidence, question authority, and see through misinformation. As kind of information becomes more and more AI driven and it becomes harder to tell fact from fiction, I think that becomes much more challenging in the current media environment. And you also are getting people who are much weaker thinkers and will default into certain positions and will become very entrenched in those positions, which is divisive and unhealthy. And then the last kind of piece is on response to crises, right? So we talked, like, what happens if AI goes away? What happens if this is all a big bubble? What happens if tools become 10 times more expensive and a lot of companies and institutions can't afford them anymore? People are becoming so dependent on AI that they cannot critically think for themselves in certain instances. As they find themselves in these crises where they're required to act without AI, there could be some real negative implications from that. Doctors, lawyers, pilots, teachers, plenty of different professionals could be facing some kinds of risks similar to those that we discussed about here. I think the human judgment is really the backstop for all of that. And as that erodes and as people have their skills kind of atrophy, that's going to cause a big risk at a lot of different levels of society. And I'll end there.
Yeah. Great, thanks. All right, Chris, you can do your second rebuttal or expansion. You have 5 minutes and your time starts now.
I just forgot a lot of what I was about to say. I don't know. I think as we talk about what will happen if the tool disappears and the people that are so reliant on AI have to fend without it, I think Okay, so if it's only been kind of in the public use for just under 2 years, and we are at a point where we are so dependent and so needy that we can't operate without it already, I don't think that's an issue with the AI. I think that's an issue with us. I think, I don't know, as I've been kind of researching and looking at this, I think one of the things that I've seen over and over in this is one of the things that AI is really good at doing is expediting the process, right? It's good at making things happen faster. And so I feel like our decline in critical thinking, our decline in skills and abilities and able to think outside the box or whatever else, that decline's been happening for a long while. Talk about pessimist. You look at all the way back to like in the 90s where there was the creative crisis, talking about dropping in creativity scores and test scores that are dropping all over the country and all that kind of stuff. I feel like what this possibly has done, AI, is it hasn't caused our brains to not be able to think critically anymore, but it has sped up that process. It has shown the weaknesses that we have as either a society or an institution or whatever field it is. It's shown the holes that were already there, and it's just made it happen faster, and it made it happen on a much larger scale. That's not the fault of the tool. That's the fault of the user. That's the fault of the person coming into it, not coming into it without the skills of critical thinking to begin with. Whether we've just kind of been watching a news feed and we've accepted whatever it tells us, or whatever thread on Reddit or whatever else, like the decline of critical thinking has been there already. And so I don't think we can blame AI for that issue. I think what it is AI, again, going back to it, AI is a tool that for the people that are strong in that field and strong in that ability to think critically, it's a tool that will elevate them, that will put them above everybody else, that will open up new doors in the medical fields and in manufacturing and statistics and whatever else, and the stuff that that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. The right people with the right tools can do amazing things. And so to just say that this has, warped our brains and we can't think critically anymore, I feel is unfair, because I don't think AI has caused that. I think we have caused that. And so, yeah, it's not a matter of overusage of AI or dependence on that. It's that a lot of us just aren't there to start with. And so if we're coming at a tool not knowing how to use it without the skills to be able to use it properly, then yeah, bad things will happen. like we won't get the results that we want. And so yeah, I think that's just that was on my thought there, and that's where I'll stop my rebuttal.
Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and move into closing statements. So you'll have 3 minutes each. And Ross, you have your closing statements first, and your 3 minutes starts now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence in support of my point, even though we are relatively early in the game, as we both kind of agreed in terms of peer-reviewed studies on this field. But there's a pattern in, several research studies over, well over a decade now, that when we outsource our cognitive work to AI, our capabilities measurably decline, right? Our memory retention falls, our ability to solve problems by ourselves grows weaker, our creativity drops, as per the MIT study, our emotional intelligence is diminished, our judgment atrophies, our skills atrophy, and our analytical reasoning suffers, right? So this isn't like just a correlation. There is a lot of controlled experiments. There's brain imaging. There's a lot of data showing this causation. And I think, Chris almost kind of accepted it there. Like, okay, like maybe we've been on this decline for a while, but AI is definitely accelerating in it. If that's the case, if AI is accelerating the decline of our critical thinking, then I think we can agree that AI is bad for our critical thinking, which is the point that we're debating here. I agree with a lot of what Chris said about policy, and we need to come up with better, more elegant answers for that before the train does fully leave the station. Like I kind of said in my last kind of rebuttal, I think the stakes are really high here, right? Will people be able to innovate as effectively in the future if they just default to AI? What will happen to like our discourse and our democracy as a society as that continues to thicken and people lose the ability to think critically about what leaders may tell them, what the media may tell them. So yeah, I'm concerned about the future. I think we all are. I think there are some people who will learn how to use these tools effectively and will wield them to become more efficient and will retain the ability to think critically. But like I said, I'm worried about the rest of us, right? I'm worried about everyone else who maybe doesn't have the ability to do that. I think AI is going to be a big net negative for those people, but probably a net positive for people who are in the top, I don't know, like 20, 30% economically. So I don't think the kind of call to action here is about rejecting AI. It's not something that's going to go away. It's, to Chris's point, it's about using it wisely, right? We need to have that conscious oversight of how people are using AI. We need to teach it the right way, because if we don't do any of that, then we are going to run into these issues in the future, and the very near future, where we have people who are not capable of independent critical thought. And I don't think that's a path that we want to go down as a society together.
That's time. Good job. All right, Chris, you have 3 minutes for your closing statement, and your time starts now.
All right. So does intensive use of AI undermine critical thinking? I mean, I don't think so. I don't think it does. We can hit back again on critical thinking isn't just memorizing facts, but it's about questioning and analyzing and evaluating. And AI doesn't take away those skills. I mean, it demands those skills. You have to have those. Every time we use AI, we as a society have to ask: is this accurate? Is it relevant? How should I apply it? It's the same thing, the same way that we would take any form of information in whatever medium. That is critical thinking in action. And yes, AI may accelerate the bad, but it can also accelerate the good. It can be a tool that promotes reflection and spark questions and comparisons and debates. It becomes a tool for teaching and learning, and a way to strengthen our ability to critique and refine ideas. We've seen that AI broadens access to knowledge, and the more perspectives and the more voices and the more information to weigh, comes more opportunities to practice judgment and discernment. Critical thinking is sharpened, not dulled, when we're exposed to a wider range of ideas. Now, there is a fear that if we rely too much on AI, that things will go wrong, and that concern is real, but it's not unique. Over-reliance on any tool is a matter of education and discipline, not inevitability. The solution is not to reject AI, but to teach responsible use, just as we've done with every other tool in every field that we have ever faced. I guess I'll end and say, so critical thinking has never been about clinging to old methods. It has always been about adapting and questioning and growing with the tools at hand. AI is not an enemy of critical thought. It's the newest ally. And therefore, I don't think that usage of AI is undermining our critical thinking. I think it enriches it and it challenges it. And it will help us prepare for a better future.
You ended on very different notes. All right. I guess that's the point. Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Really good job. Appreciate your perspectives. And I'll be eager to hear from everybody what the takeaways were. So we'll make sure we get this up, and anyone who wants to do rewatch can feel free and leave comments, and we can have additional ongoing conversations on this important topic. Appreciate your time today. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.